Ready?
Hello. Hello, welcome to Author Talk. Thank you for joining us this evening for the Blue Cottage Agency Author Talk. We are so excited to be hosting Mark and Ashley tonight. This year, we're going to be hosting 8 shows with 16 authors for our 2022-2023 season. My name is Krista Sukup, and I am looking forward to introducing you to this evening's authors and their just released novels. Mark Jackson is an award-winning Western historical fiction novelist, author of the series The Tales of Zebadiah Creed. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Legends of the Old West podcast series, and known for his ability to give readers a realistic depiction of 1800s frontier life. Mark is a 7-time San Diego Music Award nominated singer, songwriter, and standing member of the Western Writers of America. Tonight, he'll be discussing his just released novel, Blue Rivers from Heaven, published by 5 Star Cengage. You can learn more about Mark on his website, markcjacksonwriter.com, and you can find a link to his website in the chat to the right. Ashley Sweeney is the award-winning author of Eliza Waite and Answer Creek, both winning numerous awards, including the Nancy Pearl Book Award and New Mexico Arizona Book Award. Tonight, we will discuss her just-released 3rd novel, Heartland, published by She Writes Press. A native New Yorker and graduate of Wheaton College in Norton, Massachusetts, she now spends winters in Tucson and summers in the Pacific Northwest. She is at work on her 4th novel based on her great-grandmother coming alone from Ireland and settling into the American West. She's a member of Western Writers of America, Women Writing the West, Pacific Northwest Authors Association, Arizona Authors Association, Historical Novel Society, and Story Circle Network. You can learn more about Ashley on her website, ashleysweeneyauthor.com, and you can also find a link in the chat. We do invite you to submit your comments and questions on the chat. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mark so we can begin discussing Heartland.
All right. Thank you, Krista. Glad to be here. This is amazing. I just released my book last week, as a matter of fact, and to start out like this is I'm very grateful to be here. And enough about me. This is Ashley's book. I finished it last week, and it is an amazing novel. And what I'm going to do is the format for at least the next few minutes is I've put together several questions I'm going to ask Ashley, and let her talk a little bit more about Ruby Fortune and the adventures of her, and maybe we'll even understand why the book's titled Heartland. And so I'm going to start out kind of a technical question of as a writer myself. So the first and last chapters are narrated by Ruby herself, and they really do bookend the novel quite well. And it's in her voice, first person narrative. But then the second I almost said paragraph, second chapter goes right into a close third person narrative, and it's all in present tense, which is we oftentimes think that with something told, particularly in the late 19th century, early 20th century, would be past tense, but she writes in present tense, which I find fascinating. I guess that's the first question is most writers would stay in first person past tense. Why did you choose to go third person to tell Ruby's story in the present tense, I guess?
Great. Well, thanks so much for interviewing me, Mark, and I look forward to interviewing you the second half of this hour. And Krista, I think that you're still on screen, just so you know, and just wanted to point that out. So, well, first and foremost, Mark and other readers who are on today, I wanted the first and the last chapters of the book to be in Ruby's voice, as if she's talking to you right there in the room. And you hear her voice and you latch on to her story. So I'm just going to read the first paragraph just so you get a feel for that. You pop open the cover of this beautiful novel, and it starts right like this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, or so I've been told. Well, he must have had his knickers in a knot when he conjured up this corner of Arizona territory, because it's nothing but dust and cactus and snakes and some of the rattiest men you'll meet this side of Kingdom Come. Let's just say you grow scales like a lizard to survive here. I should know, or my name's not Ruby Fortune. So right away, she's talking to you. And it was purposeful to write the remainder of the narrative in that third person close and in present tense. I write all of my books in present tense, by the way. Yeah. So the reader is fully immersed into the story right here and now, but is able to see Ruby and her story from an observer's point of view. And the narrator is unnamed. Whether it's male or female is really up to the reader to decide. But I really think that the narrator is also a character in the story. Mm-hmm. And one of my early readers, I won't read the whole thing that she wrote, but she said it was front porch entertainment. And she described that by saying, the narration is what allowed me to visualize Hardland. At times I felt I was hearing and seeing the story through the prose of a long ago Jericho resident, relaying what he or she remembers about the land, the town, and its people. They know the vernacular, the issues of the day, the lay of the land, and can relay the events that unfolded with all the necessary prose to plant the reader in the heart of the story. There's a slight personification of the narrator, and I can picture myself sitting out on a wide porch on a hot summer night, drinking lemonade or maybe whiskey more like, and listening intently as the narrator sits beside me, recounting the whole story. So that was my purposeful decision to begin and end the story with Ruby's voice, and then to have the narrator tell the greater story, because the narrator knows much more than Ruby knows, don't forget. And so the narrator can fill in a lot of those blanks.
Yeah. Well, I love it. I love that way of telling a story. It is immediate. The book I'm writing now, I'm going present tense, and by reading your book at the same time, I'm on chapter 9 of my current book, I really learned quite a bit of how immediate present tense can be, and to tell a story. So, well, thank you for that first answer. I think we've broken through the nervousness, hopefully. With that said, I found that in the context of the narration, there was just some wonderful, I call them one-liners. And can I read a couple of them that I found? I think I mentioned that to you. So she's having kind of an illicit affair. I won't give too much of the story away. With an African-American miner. Now, this is 1905, I think, and it is taboo for that. So this is something that he says. He sneaks back into her room at the inn, and she goes, before she colors, she squeezes Pierce's hand. Tell me, how much did you miss me? If a clock could cry, that's how much. I just love that. I'd never heard anything like that. And
read it up.
If a clock could cry, that's how much I miss you, Ruby Fortune. That's just brilliant writing. And I got a couple more. So the good sisters come to collect a charity, and the whole town's taken in, and Ruby feels so bad because she was especially taken in. And So this is what Ruby says. She says, rare is chicken fricassee on a cattle ranch that Ruby gets solo female guests. These women, are they really sisters? Ruby doesn't judge. If women like the company of other women, that's their business. I like that. And there's one more, and I'll just read this paragraph. That night, Ruby couldn't sleep. She argues with herself until she's done with words. She dresses, pulls on her boots, and steals out the back door. Halfway across Washington Street, between Burton's and the sheriff's office, Ruby almost turns around, but she doesn't. She avoids a couple of roughs well past sobriety, rounds the back of the jail, and stands outside Sheldon's room until her heart almost knocks on the door by itself. That is just brilliant prose. It just really, until her heart almost knocks on the door by itself. I just love that. So I just really wanted to share that with you and our audience, because it's just great writing. My next question is this: from the beginning, the Arizona landscape is as much character as the characters themselves, especially as Ruby settles into her life in Jericho. Talk about how important the desert was in shaping her into the woman we see and feel by the end of the book.
Yeah. Well, even Booklist in their review said that the desert is a character in the novel, that it's ever present and it's not to be ignored. And it's really at the heart of the story, and why the book is titled Hardland is as much about the physical landscape of the desert, where I live for half the year here in Tucson in the beautiful Sonoran Desert. And I might say it's quite warm here today, and we've been experiencing some unbelievable monsoon weather, something that I've never experienced before, even with violent thunderstorms on the East Coast where I grew up. These monsoons are absolutely wild, the way the lightning races across the sky, and then the boom of the thunder. I mean, you can feel it inside, and then the raindrops are like almost as big as marbles. And so it's wild weather here, and that's why the Sonoran Desert is so green, but it's very harsh at the same time. So the reason why I titled it thus was because it's an analogy to Ruby's life. She's a hard woman. She lives in a hard place during a hard time and in a hard land. So that prickly but beautiful juxtaposition of the desert and of Ruby's character. So I'm very tuned into the desert here. I began my writing career very early as a poet, Mark. And so I think that comes through in my prose now, especially as it pertains to setting. And there are some lovely passages about the desert here. Some people look at the desert and just dismiss it, but the more you look at the desert, really, the more beautiful it can become. And I won't give anything away, but the desert also has its own character arc in the novel, and that is evident in the last chapter. So don't go reading the last chapter, all of you readers. It's a wild ride. You have to earn getting to that last chapter.
Well, it ties into the first chapter, because the first chapter describes about as brutal a landscape and the time and the time in the West, and particularly that area in Jericho and around Tucson. And then she comes full circle in the last chapter, and I think that's just a beautiful arc for the book. It really is. All right, let's keep going. Where in a historical context does Ruby stand?
I love that question. I've never been asked that question yet. Of course, the book's only been out 2 weeks, but I've had a flurry of events in the last 2 weeks. It's amazing. My eyes are still open. It's an exhausting time, launch season, but it's a wonderfully fun time as well. So definitely, I really appreciate this question. And Ruby stands as a tough, independent cowgirl. And I've done a lot of research about through nonfiction. I've got stacks of books here about pioneer women and cowgirls. And I believe another colleague of ours, Chris Enns, just came.
Chris Enns.
New book, Along Came a Cowgirl, which just came out this week, and I can't wait to get my hands on that. But there were likely many rubies in the American landscape, but we don't really read about them in fiction, especially in Westerns. A lot of the females are portrayed in old tropes, like a madam or a prostitute or a damsel in distress or a shopkeeper or a schoolmarm. And I have some of those characters in Heartland, and I hope I fleshed them out, more than one-dimensional characters. But for Ruby, she's really one of a kind. One reviewer said she's a new American archetype, and I'm just thrilled about that. There are very few women portrayed in Western literature that have the same agency as Ruby. I can think of Taya Obrecht's Inland and Whiskey When We're Dry by John Larison. Those are two that have really tough, believable characters. And I have to give props to you, Mark, and also to Jim Jones and James Wade and others who are writing female characters with agency, that they're not just tropes in your novels. And I really appreciate that as a female reader of Western literature, that, the women can be just as tough as the men, just give them the chance. And so I really appropriate that. But where she fits into history is she's an enterprising entrepreneur, and she's not unlike Eliza Waite in my first novel that is named Eliza Waite, who is opens a bakery in Skagway in 1898 during the Klondike Gold Rush. But I like to think that Ruby is a lot more outspoken, especially than Eliza was. And I think she would be on fire about women's rights. Like, if you think about the 19th century, women had very few rights. They couldn't take out a loan or own property. And that's why Ruby has to ask Sheldon Sloan, the sheriff, to help her with the loan and with the title. They couldn't file for divorce or have custody of their children. They couldn't work outside the home if they were married, and they could be institutionalized on a husband's whim. In fact, my own husband's great-grandmother, after the birth of her first child, had postpartum depression, and her husband institutionalized her, and in short order married another woman who raised the 4 children, and none of the children ever saw their mother again. Mm-hmm. She was institutionalized for life because of postpartum depression. And, of course, women had no reproductive rights at that time. They couldn't vote or hold political office. So I'd like to think that Ruby would have been on fire about women's rights, especially about the right to vote, because only 6 states had the vote by the time this novel was written. Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, Idaho, Washington, and California. In 1912, right after Arizona became a state, they ratified the vote for women, and Kansas and Oregon also ratified in 1912. But it wasn't until 1920 that women got the vote. So I just like to think that, if I were to write a sequel, which I'm not going to, by the way, Mark, there are too many ideas running around in my brain, but I would like to think that Eliza, if I wrote a sequel to that, or Ruby, if I wrote a sequel to that, would really be on fire, especially for the vote.
Yeah. Excellent answer. That time was so dynamic. The world was literally exploding in technology and changes. I explore that in my podcast for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, because they were late 1890s was when they were robbing banks, and then it wasn't until early 20th century that they even go down south to Bolivia. So, and doing the history of that, just the idea of having electric lights,
Right.
replacing gas lights in these western towns.
Faucets.
Huh? Faucets, indoor. And you bring all that into play when she is able to renovate the hotel.
Indoor plumbing.
Indoor plumbing. Yeah, they're all thrilled about that. They don't have to go to the outhouse anymore. So, well, great answer. I appreciate that as a historical novelist myself. This next question is about, in the earlier part of the book, the trauma and the violent trauma that she endured through the antagonist of the book, Willie. You mentioned it's ironic that we both have antagonists named Willie. I find that you found it interesting, but then I went, wow, that's so true. What is it about Willie? I hope we don't offend the Willies in the world. But our listeners would have to read the book to really understand. But maybe you can talk about that briefly today. The violent trauma Ruby experiences in her marriage to Willie shapes her every bit as much as the hard land does. Can you speak to this aspect of the book?
I can, and thank you for asking that question, Mark, because it's said to write what you know, and it's also said to write hard and clear about what hurts. That was Hemingway, and that's what I did. And this story is very personal to me. When I was a young woman, I was repeatedly assaulted by a man I loved. And I ended that relationship after too long. Not in the way that Ruby did, by the way.
Do we want to give it away? I don't think so. You have to read the book to find out.
But it was at great cost and consequence to me at the time. And I became a statistic at that point. 1 out of every 3 women in the United States has been assaulted by an intimate partner. And that's 50 million American women, which is a staggering and unacceptable number of women who have been abused by either a boyfriend or a partner or a spouse. So I'm writing real life here in the book. And I've said it on a couple of other podcasts, and I'm going to say it on every podcast that I'm ever invited on, that if one woman changes her life situation as a result of reading Heartland, I will have succeeded in not only coming forward with my own story, but by telling Ruby's story. And in the end, we're both survivors. That's the good news, loud and proud, we're both survivors. And so I thank you for asking that question. And we're probably about at the time where we should turn the tables, and I should start asking you some questions about your wonderful book, Blue Rivers of Heaven.
Let me ask one more question. Okay. Well, I'll just have to say, I'll make the statement clear. Ruby's a good mother. I have to tell you that. And the way you portray her, and that was one of my questions, is Ruby a good mother? And you can maybe take a few seconds to talk about that, because I really appreciate your honesty as a writer and sharing her story and the shame, the guilt and the sense of failure that the failures and this ties into the last question. But I just want to say that she's a really good mother, and you portrayed her as such. And by the end of the book, were you surprised at how well Ruby turns out?
Well, this is maybe a little known fact, but as soon as I write my beginning of a book, I write the end of my book.
Oh.
So I know exactly where my character is going. it's the journey that's the surprise.
Yeah.
And I have a technique that maybe you use or some other writers use, but I come to my desk and I place my characters into a scene, and then I close my eyes and I watch the scene as if it's happening in a movie, and then I write it down. I don't direct my characters, they really direct me. And so the fun with Ruby was to see how she got from the point A to the point B. And actually, the first and last chapter, the ones in her voice, hardly changed in the 18 months that I wrote Heartland. But the journey to get there, what was really, well, it was cathartic for sure, for both Ruby and for me. But it was also, there were parts where it was a hoot. It was a lot of fun to write her character and to just be unapologetically Ruby. And so I think I thank you for saying she was a good mother. I hope I'm a good mom too, if you kids are watching. So, but anyway.
I think we all question ourselves. I'm a father myself of 3 beautiful children. Well, they're not children anymore, but
I know my baby just turned 30. It's like hard to believe.
30, yeah.
Yeah.
I know. My youngest is 31, so it's this is where we are at in life. So.
We are, and interestingly enough, for readers out there, both Mark and I published our first books when we were 59, and that is coming off of other careers before that time. But now that we are full-time writers, I can probably speak for Mark as well by saying we are never going to retire now.
No.
My 93-year-old father, if he's on tonight in Maryland, is the author of 12 books, and he's still writing. And so as long as I draw breath, I'll be writing. And I think and hope you will be too, Mark. So
my mentor was Chet Cunningham, and any Western Writers members will know that name. And he was my mentor. He brought me into the San Diego Professional Writers Group. I had just barely written the first short story of Zeb, and he's the first one to tell me that you might have something here, kid. And when he passed away in 2017, I was able to give him a signed copy of my first book, and he had written 375 books, published, lived his whole life writing, and wrote up to the last 2 weeks of his life. So,
well, let's all be like Chuck, right?
Chet Cunningham. Yeah, he's my inspiration. So,
well, Blue Rivers of Heaven was my first introduction to you and your work, Mark. And this is the third in the Zebadiah Creed trilogy. So I'm hoping that you can bring us up to speed in just a couple of minutes from the first 2 books, just so we know where we're at with Zeb before we pick up Blue Rivers of Heaven, because a lot of other readers out there will just tonight be introduced to both of our works. And it's such a gorgeous cover. It's a absolutely wonderful book. I was on the absolute edge of my seat. It's one of those books that you get to the end of the chapter and you say, okay, just one more chapter. Okay, just one more chapter. And so I absolutely was riveted by it. And I just hope that you can bring us quickly up to speed about who Zeb is, and before we open the pages of this novel.
Sounds good. Well, there's tricks of the trade on ending chapters and beginning chapters that I've learned pretty good, quite well, actually. Well, Zebadiah Creed is he's a frontiersman, and it starts out with him and his brother. This is the first book, An Eye for an Eye. Just right out the bat, him and his brother are coming down the Missouri River, coming down from 1835 rendezvous, and they get swamped by a steamboat, kind of stuck in the mud, and these, we don't find out until later these guys show up to help them out, that later find them and bushwhack them, and Zeb's brothers, Jonathan is murdered, and Zeb's left for dead. It happens pretty quick. And Zeb's found by a Quaker doctor and his daughter in the wilderness along the Missouri River, right around Arrow Rock, Missouri. And they brought Zeb back to life, and he kind of falls for her. However, the more well he became, the more vengeance burned, and he had to make a decision: is to stay there and lead a calm life, and always wonder if he should have gone after the killers, and he chose to go after them. And it's really his story of going down the Mississippi, befriending Billy Freeze, who is as he called him, a Brit, an young English guy, to enter into the criminal world that permeated the Mississippi River in St. Louis, and he ends up spending a night in Mississippi with John. I can't remember. It's funny, I can't remember my own character's name. Anyway, it ends up in New Orleans, and the first book is really about him seeking revenge, and then realizing that there's a lot more to just killing the man that killed your brother, and he finds out about that. He along the way, I think the first book is also about friendship and trusting people, and trusting the people that the closest to you. The whole time he really didn't trust Billy Freeze, and then he finds out at the very end that Billy Freeze certainly was his best friend, and because of Billy's death, he moves on. He decides that he needs to go, because they were going to go together to fight in the Texas Revolution, and that's what the Great Texas Dance is all about. And once I realized, when I write these books, oftentimes the historical research plays a really keen part in the weaving the plot and telling the tale. For instance, I'll tell you a little something about the first book. I have a character named Frenchie who owns a bordello in St. Louis. It's Frenchie's Emporium is what he calls it. And some really bad stuff goes down there, and Zeb is a part of it. It has to do with Wolverines and the sense of Western justice meted out by a couple of bad Wolverines. So I didn't know who Frenchie was. He was a compelling character. And when I'm doing research, I get Zeb down to New Orleans, and I find out, I do some research on, find out that the pirate Jean Lafitte was said to have possibly ended up not off the coast of Veracruz, drowning in one of his ships, but ended up spiriting away to St. Louis and living his life in St. Louis. So guess who shows up as a quasi character and plays a big role, and though he stays in St. Louis, a big role in developing the end of An Eye for an Eye, and as Jean Lafitte. and Jean Lafitte, certainly, as you can attest, comes back in the third book as Frenchie. So I was able to bring that full circle back around, because I really liked Frenchie. I think he could be cruel as any man in the West at that time, but he had. I think he had kind of a good soul. I don't know. Maybe you can tell me as we get to know Frenchie a lot more in the third book than the first one. Now, the Great Texas Dance, I wanted to put him, when I realized at the end of An Eye for an Eye, it was October 1835. And I'm looking around and says, what would Zeb do? He's not going to go back to Anna, not quite yet. Okay. He's not going to do that quite yet. So where would he end up? Well, he would end up going with his buddy Billy Freeze if Billy hadn't been killed. And that's why he goes to go fight in the Texas Revolution. And I wanted the second book to start out with him at the Alamo, and he gets out because a lot of the men they were able to come and go as messengers. So I made him a messenger. That's what we do when we write novels, fiction. Made him a messenger. And so throughout the almost the entire book, he becomes a messenger, and that enabled me for Zeb to experience the whole of the Texas Revolution from a few days before the fall of the Alamo through Gonzales, where they were supposed to have been putting together a militia, and they eventually did, meeting Sam Houston at the Colorado River, where Houston was supposed to have had an army, which he did not, all the way through to experiencing the Goliad Massacre, which is the center of my book, and just how brutal and how petty mistakes were made that a lot of men died. And Zeb was we were able to witness that through Zeb's eyes and his perspective. And the fact that toward the end of the book, we find out that it really wasn't that much of a noble cause. The reason why they fought against the Mexicans is because the Mexicans were abolishing slavery, and they were making millions of dollars in the cotton plantations in the eastern part of Texas. And the men with money decided they would revolt, and there was money that came in from the cotton plantations and the money men, particularly out of New Orleans. And that's where the Lone Star conspiracy comes from. So when Zeb finds out about that, then it does become, well, why should I stay and fight for this? Because in his past life with the Indians, being raised by the Lakota, he was a slave. So, but it came down to protecting a young man named James Lee, who he swore to his mother that Zeb would take care of, and that he would go on and experience San Jacinto, which was where they routed Santa Anna. And along the way, there's a guy named Granger, where he, because Zeb really struggled with the friendship with Billy, latched on to Granger. And everybody, even the reader, knows Granger's he's not a good dude, but Zeb is taken in by him. Well, by the end of the book, Granger betrays him. Massive betrayal. And that's what gets Zeb back to New Orleans for the third book. And I don't know if I've done a righteous job in describing them.
Well, that gets us to the point of the beginning of the book, and we see a flawed character right away, and every good protagonist is flawed. And so if you could describe Zeb with 2 or 3 or 4 words, how would you describe him, especially at the beginning of the novel?
Well, first of all, loyalty comes to mind right off the bat. He's fiercely loyal to what he thinks is right, I think. And sometimes that changes because he really did not like Frenchie at all when he was in St. Louis. But when Frenchie shows up in the third book, and Zeb really needs Frenchie and Olgan's Pierre to sway this horrific situation that he finds himself in, to go and assassinate Sam Houston, which historically Sam Houston was in New Orleans. He was healing from a gunshot wound that he had been shot in the ankle in San Jacinto. And the night that all this takes place, and you know what night I'm talking about, a whole section takes place on June 11th. And that was the night that Sam Houston actually left. So what I try to do is place Zeb in direct context to historical events. I'm veering off your original question.
That's okay.
But for him to, for instance, go and kill Sam Houston it's just not going to happen, because Sam Houston was his confidant in the second book. Sam Houston was his confidant and more of a father figure. So of course Zeb is going to do everything he can to not only save Houston's life so he can go back to Texas and become the Republic of Texas's first president. But then he must also go save Anna, who now it's a race back up the river to save Anna from Willie Dan. Okay. I don't know. You tell me. What do you think about Zeb? These questions I looked at your questions and I'm going, wow, loyalty is the only one that comes to mind, and almost an overabundance of that.
Definitely vengeful, Mark. I mean, he's definitely vengeful.
Yes, he is that. I mean, he went after those guys. He didn't kill them, but he killed one. He did kill Baumgartner. And when he saw Baumgartner, it was stand or die. And
speaking of killings, for a good story, we have to kill our darlings, as they say. And will you talk a little bit about that? I mean, my heart was just breaking, as I don't want to give too much away. Maybe we shouldn't talk too much about it, but that's the mark of a good writer, when one of the characters who you really admire and who the character has a real history with, has to be eliminated from the story. It's maybe, instead of talking about who it was and why, how do you feel as an author when you have to kill off a darling?
Well, I write these things with my mother. I don't know if I told you that. And
yes, I think that's a wonderful aspect of the story.
And she has this it's like Anna is such a central character. We only see her in the beginning of the first book and at the end of the third book, but she's such a central character because she is present throughout all three books. And we're writing along in the third book, and Mom goes, "Well, how are we going to deal with Anna?" Well, she's got to die. Anna's just got to die.
That's what I thought was going to happen all the way through too.
I'm going, she can't die. I can't kill Anna. But I guess the hardest one. Did you read the first and second books?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
I have
There's a character.
both, however.
Pardon?
I have them both.
Okay. So in the second book, Zeb comes along this farmhouse, and right after he leaves the Alamo, and they feed him and take care of him, and he's on the way to Gonzales, and this young boy, 14 years old, his father has already left to go to Gonzales to fight, and he's befriends Zeb and Granger, and they end up taking him to Gonzales, and then he finds his father and Goliad, and then Zeb picks up with James Lee and Goliad. His father's name's Jacob Lee. And Jacob Lee, the father, is killed in the Goliad massacre. Well, James Lee escapes with Zeb. Now Zeb is beholden to this young boy, this boy that quickly becomes a man. And so for the last half of the book, it's really Zeb and James. Now, at the end of the book, I'm giving away at the end. I knew that Granger was going to betray Zeb, however way that happened. I didn't even know how it worked out. That's kind of the way I work. I know it's going to happen, but I don't know how. So I'm like you. You know, I have a sense of an arc of a story. I know where he's going to end up, but I don't know how. And that's just the magic of writing. Yes. Is to sit down and just be. It's like he ends up killing this guy in the first book named Baumgartner, who killed his brother up on the Missouri River. Found Baumgartner, and to me, Baumgartner wasn't supposed to show up for another couple of chapters. Well, I'm writing around, and Zeb's in the bordello, Sophie LaRue's bordello, and all of a sudden the door opens, and it's a rainy night. The door blows open, and I'm writing this, and I'm going, "Who? Holy smokes! It's Baumgartner!" Baumgartner shows up here. Okay, so now what does Zeb have to do? Zeb, unarmed, has to confront this guy. Okay. And they go toe to toe, and I can tell you can almost imagine Zeb didn't die. He had to write 2 more books about Zeb.
I love how passionate you are when you talk about your writing, Mark. And I was saying that just the other day to my husband about how there's nothing more than I love than just being at my desk and creating these fictional worlds, even though they're placed in historical context.
Yeah.
We have fictional protagonists, so we're able to control, who they are through that story. And I just absolutely love your passion, because I come across as a very passionate writer myself, and so I absolutely love how that's coming through here tonight. And we probably have time maybe for one more question before we go to some.
Well, let me finish real quick about James. So I knew something was going to happen. I didn't know what. And I literally at one point brought me to tears. Billy Freeze and James Lee were 2 of my characters that it was really, really sad. And you asked me about killing off my darlings. They were a couple of my darlings. However, the tale must be told, right?
That's right. One last question I'd like to ask is, I feel like Zeb has a nebulous concept of home. And I'm not sure that there's going to be a 4th or a 5th or a 6th book here. This may be the end of the trilogy. And so maybe you wouldn't be spilling too much by telling us about Zeb's concept of home and what that means to him.
Well, the backstory comes through all 3 books, in that Zeb really never had a home. When he was about 11 years old, his Quaker parents were murdered by the Sioux and he and his brother were taken in as slaves. However, which often happened in a great film called A Man Called Horse. This portrays that. Zeb and his brother eventually, by the time they were of age, became warriors, and that's what gives Zeb his spirit and his fearlessness to go toe to toe with anyone if he feels it necessary. What was I going to say?
Well, at the end,
so he really didn't have a home except for that, and then something happens, and he has to leave the tribe. He and his brother leave the tribe, and so now he's on the move. I guess his home that he always was pining for was to go back to the mountains. That he experienced all this, and we get 3 books out of this, and the whole time all he can think about is clear water, blue skies, deerskin, buckskin, a good rifle, and mountains to go hunting in and trapping, because he was a trapper. He trapped beaver, but even that was played out, and that plays out really well in the 3rd book. Yet at the end of the 3rd book, he does find a home. And it's quite, I guess that's why I asked you if it surprised you at how well Ruby turns out. I knew that he would end up with Anna.
And
I just
we're
knew
so
that.
glad he did.
Yeah. And it's almost cliche. I really went back and forth, and the way the ending turned out, he realizes that there can be a sense of redemption, that revenge leaves a bitter taste in your mouth, and then we find that he's quite comfortable. But I've already written the 1st chapter of the 4th book. And old Zeb's got a lot more living to do. I'll just leave it there. So,
well, perhaps some of our listeners have questions, or Krista has questions for us.
Yes, thank you, guys. This has just been an awesome conversation. We do have a lot of really great comments. People are really enjoying watching this. And one of the questions that popped up, I'm curious about. Sue Reddy is asking, what might be some similarities between Ruby and Zeb?
Oh, I'll go first.
You go first, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Sue. I noticed as I was reading Blue Rivers that both Ruby and Zeb have a really complicated relationship with a higher power, God, or whoever you might call a higher power, and also with authority. And I think that goes hand in hand. So that was a similarity that I saw between Ruby and Zeb, that they had very complicated relationships with God and with authority. Also, I think they both have ferocious hearts, and that plays out in their language and in their actions. And so to me, ferocious isn't necessarily just a male adjective. It can also be a female adjective. So those are some of the similarities that I see between the characters.
I agree 100%. With Zeb, he has a wonderful conversation with one of the prisoners in the swamp, and they're the only two that actually see this ghost.
Right.
And he has a conversation. The guy asked him, he says, "Do you believe in Jesus Christ, Savior of our Lord," and all that? And Zeb goes, he's looking at the crows, and he's looking out. They're sitting on this boat in the middle of the swamp. It's quite a magical, though the circumstances are horrendous. It's quite a magical moment. And he goes, "This is my God. This is the present moment right here, pretty much right here, right now is, and I think Zeb in his mind, now he may change later, he doesn't need a God like most others of that time needed or perceived. He just it's not part of his makeup. Yet he is in touch with, as he was raised by the Sioux, he is in touch with maybe far more than most, within himself and without. So, yeah, I think, and Ruby the same way, as the first and last chapters in her voice explain it so beautifully so with her. So.
That was a great question and great answers. A lot of people. So this book has only been, both of these books have only been out for a couple weeks, and already people are picking these up and reading them, and a lot of comments about people just really loving Ruby and loved Ruby's story. One tough lady with heart. Love Ruby Fortune. Somebody made a comment about one of you with the present tense notion really caught their attention, and it is a good tool and you use it well. I think that was one of the early readers that was able to read. I think that was Mark's book, right, in present tense.
It was actually Ashley's. Ashley's right.
Oh, Ashley's. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Ashley's book.
I'm hardcore past tense with Zeb.
Okay.
My new book is in present tense though. So. Yeah.
And that's another question that came up, is if any of your books are being looked at for movie or TV.
I can go with that. I do have here in San Diego. I live in San Diego. It's where I'm at right now. And an old friend of mine, he did the first couple of covers of my CDs back when we had CDs. Back in the 2000s. He's a graphic artist, and I noticed on Facebook after a while he's putting up these short films, and I reached out to him after about 15 years, and we got together, and I sent him a short story called The Hanging, and this is the very first story that I wrote where I find Zeb. It's taken from a dream I had many years ago. That's where Zeb came from. And I wrote the story. It's called The Hanging, and I sent it to Alfred. I hope he's watching. I sent it to Alfred, and 2 weeks later, he wrote a script. So we are in the process. I had to take a month out because I'm going to Oklahoma to spend time with my mother and to do some book signings there. But we're going to come back and we're going to shoot a short film of my very first short story of Zeb called The Hanging. So it's not a big movie production. It's not a Netflix series, but it's to me, it's very cool to be a part of something like that, particularly a local production company. And Alfred will direct it. And so, yeah, that's very cool. It's a great script too. So
that's really exciting, Mark. I'm very hopeful, Krista and readers, so we'll just wait for that phone to ring.
If there's anybody out there,
yeah, call me.
Yeah, call us. Give us a phone call.
Both of these books are so character driven, and that's what makes excellent movies and TV. So we hope to see your books on the screen someday. But in the meantime, winter's coming. I'm coming to you from Minnesota, and we all love curling up with a great book. And both of you are just absolutely fantastic writers. I know you haven't met in person before, but we will. And it's just been a delight to have both of you together in this discussion, and many comments coming from the people who are with us tonight. We're so appreciative for those joining us live. We'll be able to watch this later as well for people who weren't able to join in, but just brilliant discussion, very enjoyable, very interesting book review of the first 2 books. Everybody's just really enjoying this talk that we had with you too. I just really want to thank you. And also I want to thank our technical director, Barrett Rezak, who's part of the Blue Cottage Agency team now. We are so happy he's with us. And Ashley and Mark's books are available wherever fine books are sold. And I always say, find your local bookstore.
Yep.
Any book, all their books are available on all platforms, and you can call your local bookstore and have it ordered in. And we really encourage you to do that. And I want you invite you to join us. We are going to have book talks the last Thursday of every month, not December and not May. But the next upcoming are on October 25th, we're going to host Jim Jones and RJ Yoho. And on November 29th, we're going to host true crime novelist Frank Weber and Martha Burns. And we are just very happy you joined us. And don't forget to subscribe to Blue Cottage. And we hope to see you again next month. And thank you, Ashley and Mark. Have a wonderful evening, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Awesome.